Amazon ordered to stop luring customers based on misspelled searches for Birkenstock. The company is worried about customers unknowingly buying counterfeits. A court in Germany has told Amazon.com that it can no longer use search terms to lure in customers who misspell Birkenstock, according to Reuters. The German sandal maker filed an injunction, complaining that the online retailer had been using variations on its brand name, such as Birkenstock, and Birkenstock on Google's AdWords. Birkenstock alleges that by luring in customers with keywords, it's potentially selling counterfeit sandals, potentially damaging the company's reputation. Amazon told Reuters that it works diligently with vendors, sellers and rights owners to detect and prevent fraudulent products reaching our marketplace. Reuters notes that the company has severed ties with Amazon in Europe and in the US because the retailer has failed to proactively prevent the sale of fakes. The retailer is concerned about low-quality copies of its footwear. It devotes a page of its website to the issue, saying that all of its products are manufactured in Germany, and recommends that prospective customers go only to authorized retailers. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here. Mail, that first-class mail business has declined dramatically. It's down by 40% since peaking in 2000. Meanwhile, the parcel delivery business has exploded. But the Postal Service hasn't been able to compensate for collapsing mail volumes due to a 2006 law that capped price increases at the rate of inflation and also limited the proportion of its budget that could be devoted to its parcel business. Still, the Postal Service might be able to eke out a profit if it weren't for another way in which Congress has tied its hands. It requires the agency to pre-fund its retiree health benefits and count them as operating expenses. In fiscal 2016, the Postal Service brought in $69.4 billion in revenue, was liable for $5.8 billion in retiree health benefits, and reported a $5.6 billion net loss. It makes sense to look to package delivery as a way to turn those fortunes around. An analyst note by Citigroup from April found that prices would have to go up by 1.41 per package in 2018, or about 40% to reflect the true cost of delivery. Those calculations are based on an analysis by UPS, which along with FedEx FDX stands to gain enormously if the Postal Service raises its prices, so they should be taken with a grain of salt. That could be a big hit to Amazon, which is one of the largest users of that parcel delivery service. The Citigroup analysts estimate that would add $2.6 billion to its current shipping costs, an increase of about 28%. Amazon did not respond to a request for comment. Perversely, that could end up benefiting the Seattle retail behemoth. According to Citigroup, Amazon already gets bulk pricing discounts because of its enormous volume, and is rapidly building out its own distribution network, which will give it more delivery options down the line. For that reason, the Citigroup analysts predict that a Postal Service price hike would hurt other retailers more than Amazon. Such a scenario should further increase Amazon's cost advantage to consumers, Citi's note reads. While the higher shipping costs would likely hurt Amazon's margin in the short term, increased purchase frequency and customer density should benefit margins over time. So, is any of this going to happen? In the short term, partially. The Postal Regulatory Commission just completed a year-long review of rate-setting policy, and recommended that the Postmaster General be given the authority to raise rates a couple percentage points above inflation, which could bring the agency closer to break-even. Meanwhile, the Postmaster General has urged passage of legislation pending in Congress that would give the agency more control over its operations and relieve it of the burden of pre-funding health benefits. Looking forward, a coalition of unions and public interest non-profits have advocated for allowing the Postal Service to provide other services, such as banking, through its vast network of post offices. Trump has sway over the Postal Service. He's made 3 board nominations, who are currently awaiting Senate action. By law, it's supposed to have 9 appointed members, and currently it has none. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.
Trump wants Postal Service to charge much more for Amazon shipments. Seattle, Washington. Reuters. President Donald Trump called on the U.S. Postal Service on Friday to charge much more to ship packages for Amazon AMZNO. picking another fight with an online retail giant he has criticized in the past. Why is the United States Post Office, which is losing many billions of dollars a year, while charging Amazon and others so little to deliver their packages, making Amazon richer and the post office dumber and poorer, should be charging much more? Trump wrote on Twitter. The president's tweet drew fresh attention to the fragile finances of the Postal Service at a time when tens of millions of parcels have just been shipped all over the country for the holiday season. The U.S. Postal Service, which runs at a big loss, is an independent agency within the federal government and does not receive tax dollars for operating expenses, according to its website. Package delivery has become an increasingly important part of its business as the internet has led to a sharp decline in the amount of first-class letters. The president does not determine postal rates. They are set by the Postal Regulatory Commission, an independent government agency with commissioners selected by the president from both political parties. That panel raised the prices on packages by almost 2% in November. Amazon was founded by Jeff Bezos, who remains the chief executive officer of the retail company and is the richest person in the world, according to Bloomberg News. Bezos also owns The Washington Post, a newspaper Trump has repeatedly railed against in his criticisms of the news media. In tweets over the past year, Trump has said the Amazon Washington Post fabricated stories. He has said Amazon does not pay sales tax, which is not true, and so hurts other retailers. Part of a pattern by the former businessman and reality television host of periodically turning his ire on big American companies since he took office in January. Daniel Ives, a research analyst at GBH Insights, said Trump's comment could be taken as a warning to the retail giant. However, he said he was not concerned for Amazon. We do not see any price hikes in the future. However, that is a risk that Amazon is clearly aware of and it is building out its distribution system aggressively, he said. Amazon has shown interest in the past in shifting into its own delivery service, including testing drones for deliveries. In 2015, the company spent $11.5 billion on shipping, 46% of its total operating expenses that year. Amazon shares were down 0.86% to 1,175.90 by early afternoon. Overall, U.S. stock prices were down slightly on Friday. Millions of parcels. Satish Gindal, president of ShipMatrix Incorporated, which analyzes shipping data, disputed the idea that the Postal Service charges less than United Parcel Service Incorporated UPSN and FedEx Corp FDXN, the other biggest players in the parcel delivery business in the United States. Many customers get lower rates from UPS and FedEx than they would get from the post office for comparable services, he said. The Postal Service delivers about 62% of Amazon packages, for about 3.5 to 4 million a day during the current peak year-end holiday shipping season, Jindal said. The Seattle-based company and the post office have an agreement in which mail carriers take Amazon packages on the last leg of their journeys, from post offices to customers' doorsteps. Amazon's No. 2 carrier is UPS, at 21%, and FedEx is third, with 8% or so, according to Jindal. Trump's comment tapped into a debate over whether postal service pricing has kept pace with the rise of e-commerce, which has flooded the mail with small packages. Private companies like UPS have long claimed the current system unfairly undercuts their business. Steve Gott, a spokesman for UPS, noted that the company values its productive relationship with the Postal Service, but that it has filed with the Postal Regulatory Commission its concerns about the Postal Service's methods for covering costs. Representatives for Amazon, the White House, the U.S. Postal Service and FedEx declined comment or were not immediately available for comment on Trump's tweet. According to its annual report, the Postal Service lost $2.74 billion this year, and its deficit has ballooned to $61.86 billion, while the Postal Service's revenue for first-class mail, marketing mail and periodicals is flat or declining. Revenue from package delivery is up 44% since 2014 to $19.5 billion. The fiscal year ended September 30, 2017. But it also lost about $2 billion revenue when a temporary surcharge expired in April 2016. According to a Government Accountability Office report in February, the service is facing growing personnel expenses, particularly 73.4 billion inches unfunded pension and benefits liabilities. The Postal Service has not announced any plans to cut costs. By law, the Postal Service has to set prices for package delivery to cover the costs attributable to that service. But the Postal Service allocates only 5.5% of its total cost to its business of shipping packages, even though that line of business is 28% of its total revenue. Additional reporting by Lahori Chatterjee in Bengaluru, India, writing by Patricia Zenderal, editing by Damon Darlin, Francis Carey and David Gregorio. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.
Trump targets Amazon in call for Postal Service to hike prices. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday targeted online retailer Amazon in a call for the country's Postal Service to raise prices of shipments in order to recoup costs. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday targeted online retailer Amazon in a call for the country's Postal Service to raise prices of shipments in order to recoup costs. Why is the United States Post Office, which is losing many billions of dollars a year, while charging Amazon and others so little to deliver their packages, making Amazon richer and the post office dumber and poorer? Should be charging much more, Trump wrote in a post on Twitter. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here. In the interview that there had been any collusion with Russia. U.S. intelligence agencies believe Moscow tried to tip the presidential election in favor of Mr. Trump, a charge denied by both Russia and the U.S. president. Mr. Trump has labeled Mr. Mueller's investigation a witch hunt, while other Republicans accuse it of bias. Mr. Trump repeated his allegation that Democrats had invented the issue as a hoax, as a ruse, as an excuse for losing an election. The president said he was not concerned about when the inquiry would finish, as he had nothing to hide. But he said it makes the country look very bad, and it puts the country in a very bad position. So the sooner it's worked out, the better it is for the country. He was repeating his comments from May that the probe was hurting the U.S. terribly. Mr. Trump said the matter had angered his supporters, adding, "My base is stronger than it's ever been." On other areas in the interview, Mr. Trump again condemned Democrats for not taking a bipartisan approach to legislation. Said he had to endorse the defeated candidate Roy Moore in the Alabama special election, as that was what the head of the Republican Party had to do. Again criticized Attorney General Jeff Sessions for accusing himself from the Russia inquiry. Said he believed the media would become more favorable to him as their ratings would go down the tubes if he were not in office. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.
50,000 years ago, when he worked at the President's New Jersey Golf Club and was trying to make the PGA Tour, Mr. Trump asked him how much he made playing on the professional circuit. "It's like 3 million, Mr. Herman said. Which to him is like making $1 billion, because he doesn't spend anything," Mr. Trump joked. Ain't that a great story? In the interview, the president touted the strength of his campaign victories and his accomplishments in office, including passage of a tax overhaul this month. But he also expressed frustration and anger at Democrats, who he said refused to negotiate on anything. But he doesn't do anything. He doesn't do, Mr. Trump said. "Hey, let's get together, let's do bipartisan." I say, "Good, let's go." Then you don't hear from him again. Nonetheless, Mr. Trump said he still hoped Democrats will work with him on bipartisan legislation in the coming year to overhaul healthcare, improve the country's crumbling infrastructure, and help young immigrants brought to the country as children. Mr. Trump disputed reports that suggested he does not have a detailed understanding of legislation, saying, "I know the details of taxes better than anybody. Better than the greatest CPA. I know the details of healthcare better than most. Better than most." Later, he added that he knows more about the big bills debated in the Congress than any president that's ever been in office. The president also spoke at length about the special election this month in Alabama, where Roy Moore, the Republican candidate, lost to a Democrat after being accused of sexual misconduct with young girls, including a minor, when he was in his 30s. Mr. Trump said that he supported Mr. Moore's opponent in the Republican primary race because he knew Mr. Moore would lose in the general election. And he insisted that he endorsed Mr. Moore later only because I feel that I have to endorse Republicans as the head of the party. Mr. Mueller's investigation appears to be moving ahead despite predictions by Mr. Trump's lawyers this year that it would be over by Thanksgiving. Mr. Trump said that he was not bothered by the fact that he does not know when it will be completed because he has nothing to hide. Mr. Trump repeated his assertion that Democrats invented the Russia allegations as a hoax, as a ruse, as an excuse for losing an election. He said that everybody knows his associates did not collude with the Russians. Even as he insisted that the real stories are about Democrats who worked with Russians during the 2016 campaign. There's been no collusion. But I think it's going to be fair, Mr. Trump said of Mr. Mueller. In recent weeks, Republican lawmakers have seized on anti-Trump texts sent by an FBI investigator who was removed from Mr. Mueller's team as evidence of political bias. At a hearing this month, Representative Jim Jordan, Republican of Ohio, said that the public trust in this whole thing is gone. Although Mr. Trump said he believes Mr. Mueller will treat him fairly, Mr. Trump raised questions about how the special counsel had dealt with the lobbyist Tony Podesta. Mr. Podesta is the brother of Mrs. Clinton's campaign chairman, John D. Podesta, and Tony Podesta is under investigation for work his firm, the Podesta Group, did on behalf of a client referred to it in 2012 by Paul Manafort, the former Trump campaign chairman. Whatever happened to Podesta? Mr. Trump said. They closed their firm. They left in disgrace, the whole thing, and now you never heard of anything. Mr. Trump tried to put distance between himself and Mr. Manafort, who was indicted in October. The president said that Mr. Manafort, whom he called very nice man and an honorable person, had spent more time working for other candidates and presidents than for him. Paul only worked for me for a few months, Mr. Trump said. Paul worked for Ronald Reagan. His firm worked for John McCain, worked for Bob Dole, worked for many Republicans for far longer than he worked for me. And you're talking about what Paul was many years ago before I ever heard of him. He worked for me for what was it, 3.5 months? Mr. Trump said it was too bad that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, recused himself from overseeing the Russia investigation. Mr. Trump did not directly answer a question about whether he thought that Eric H. Holder Jr., President Barack Obama's first Attorney General, was more loyal than Mr. Sessions had been. I don't want to get into loyalty, but I will tell you that, I will say this: Holder protected President Obama. Totally protected him, Mr. Trump said. He added, when you look at the things that they did, and Holder protected the president. And I have great respect for that, I'll be honest. Mr. Trump said he believes members of the news media will eventually cover him more favorably because they are profiting from the interest in his presidency and thus will want him re-elected. Another reason that I'm going to win another 4 years is because newspapers, television, all forms of media will tank if I'm not there, because without me, their ratings are going down the tubes, Mr. Trump said, then invoked one of his preferred insults. Without me, the New York Times will indeed be not the failing New York Times, but the failed New York Times. He added, so they basically have to let me win. And eventually, probably 6 months before the election, they'll be loving me because they're saying, please, please, don't lose Donald Trump. Okay. After the interview, Mr. Trump walked out of the grill room, stopping briefly to speak to guests. He then showed off a plaque that listed the club's golf champions, including several years in which Mr. Trump had won its annual tournament. Asked how far he was hitting balls off the tee these days, Mr. Trump, who will turn 72 next year, was modest. Gets shorter every year, he said. Thank you for watching. For the follow-up, subscribe to the channel yourself here.